What's up, guys? This is the Dirt Bike Channel podcast. This is Kyle Brotherson. Thank you for tuning in to this wherever you get your podcasts. Hopefully, you are subscribed to this. Got some pretty cool content for you today. I'm going to be talking about the first ride on the Beta 300RR Race Edition. You guys are going to get this information here first because I'm giving you guys a little bit of an incentive to listen to the podcast. The people who are only the YouTubers, they're not going to get this as quickly. So you guys have a special treat by tuning in and subscribing to the podcast. So I thank you very much for that. There's been a lot of people that have asked me to get to the content on the Beta 300, and I was pretty excited about this bike. The interesting thing about this bike is, as many of you know, I've had a string of betas in the last little bit. Beta let me borrow the Beta 390 RR Race Edition. It was the 2019. I absolutely love that bike. It was my favorite bike favorite four-stroke of all time. So that was pretty cool. Love the forks on that bike. It was a Sachs fork, a closed cartridge fork. It was amazing. And then back it up, and they let me borrow a 200RR, and that 200RR was absolutely incredible. I love that bike. There was only one problem that I had with the bike, and I shared that in my review. I'm not going to beat that here, but overall, that bike is one of my favorite bikes of all time, and it can do some things better than some of the other bikes out there can do. And so I'm like, it's time for me to buy a Beta. These last two Betas have been freaking awesome, and so I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a 2020 Beta 300RR Race Edition. I kind of wanted the 250, but I let my Facebook group persuade me into getting the 300. They voted for the 300 because they knew I was going to give the bike away eventually. I thought the 250 would be better because I was going to be riding it during the desert season here in Utah, and so the 250 would be a little bit more fun for me. But I opted for the 300 because of the Facebook group. So super excited to start riding the bike, and I was very jazzed for it. So here's the things that I did to set the bike up. I set the sag to 108 millimeters while standing up. So I use a Slacker digital sag scale, which I love. I understand that they're, it's a little bit more of an expensive way to do it than just going out there and getting, your sag scale or doing it with a measuring tape. But because I'm setting up a lot of bikes, I use the Slacker scale. And that helps me so that I can set bikes up without having another person or two other people to help me set sag. So I really like that. I put Teflon tape under my levers so that they could move around, and I moved them in towards the center, which protects the levers a lot. This is extremely important, especially on the Beta, because on your brake side, you just have the Nissan brake. And the Nissan brake lever does not have like a stress point where it can break off. On Brembo brakes or on the Magura brakes and a lot of brakes out there, or a lot of levers out there, I should say, they will have a stress point where it can break, right kind of in from the ball just a little bit. Well, the Nissan brake doesn't have that, and so it's important. You either need to have a full wrap handguard on there, which I'm not a full wrap handguard kind of guy anymore, or you have to put Teflon tape under your bars and move them in a little bit for some protection. So I did that. I pulled the steering stops out of this thing so I could get max travel. This bike does actually turn a little bit tighter. It turns tight enough. It's not as tight as the KTMs. And sorry guys, I'm going to compare this bike a little bit to the KTMs, and you guys are just going to have to stuff it. Because people ask me not to compare the bikes, but that's what I'm doing. You have to have some sort of a way to compare them, and I'm not doing you guys I'm doing everyone a disservice. So there are Beta lovers that get their panties in a bunch when I compare it to a KTM. So like if you've noticed on my last couple of reviews on the 390 and the 200RR, I never mentioned KTM in the video reviews. Because people get their panties in a wad. I'm going to do that here because it would be a disservice to you and the rest of the world if I did not. So with the steering stops out of this bike, it turns tight enough. It's not as tight as a KTM, but it turns tight enough. I want them to turn as tight as humanly possible, and so it's better than the 200. It's way better than the 200, but it's not as good as a late model KTM. I put a rear disc guard on the bike so that I didn't bend that. I just have been moving that from bike to bike. That's one cool thing about the Betas, is that the same disc guard that I used on the 390, I moved that over to the 200 and I was using that, and now I moved that over to the 300 and it's working on there. So that's cool. I put more oil in the air filter because a lot of times the pre-oiled filters that come on these bikes, I don't think they have enough oil in them a lot of times. And so I put a little bit more oil in there and kneaded it into the filter and put it back on the bike. I adjusted the fork and the shock, and I set the clickers. Okay, so basically it's kind of frustrating because so this has got the KYB forks on there, but in the manual, they don't even list a single thing about the KYB fork. All it talks about in the manual is the standard open cartridge fork that you get on the standard version. They don't mention a single thing about the KYB fork. You would think that if this is a huge selling feature, they'd actually bring it up. And it's the same manual. I checked with Beta, the 300 standard version and the 300 race edition, it's the same exact manual. But they don't talk anything about that fork. So I tried to get some fork settings from different people, that have a lot of experience with KYB. It's the 5th bike that I've owned that has KYB on it. I'll get to that later. I aligned the front wheel and the axle. Basically, I took the front wheel off and made sure that my forks are in alignment in the triple clamps. Well, the way I do that is by taking the front tire off and then putting the axle back into the forks and making sure that it can spin freely. And I had to then loosen my triple clamps and make everything fit so that it worked. I took special care not to change where the forks were in as far as how high up and down they were, because I wanted to see what it was from the stock setup. So I got the front wheel aligned. I leaned out the carburetor. I put tubeless on the bike, front and rear. And then what I did was, I know I don't like the tires that come on that Beta. It's like a Metzler 6 days tire. It's those eco-friendly tires that are half worn out. Let me just say that's garbage. I think those tires are garbage. And so I got rid of them. They're an extremely hard compound. I did a couple of burnouts on the driveway because that's how I feel about that tire. I didn't ruin the tire, but I was doing some burnouts for my sons. So I put a Shinko 546 front tire on the bike and then an IRC VE33S. That is the best tire that I know of as far as an all-around tire. It's a hybrid gummy compound. It works amazing in a lot of situations. It digs in the sand. It digs in the mud. And it also hooks up on the rocks because it's got that gummy compound. So I did that. And then I put an AXP skid plate on the bike to cover the linkage. So those are the main things that I did to get it ready to ride. I went through and I torqued bolts. I also torqued, checked my head bearing tension and things to make sure that the bike wasn't too tight. It wasn't too loose up there. And then we went out and we did 3.2 engine hours. And here's what I learned. We went down to St. George, Utah. We were riding in Warner Valley. Garrett was kind enough to take us out. I had Tyler and Sam and Garrett with me, so a group of 4. And immediately when we left from the truck, we started out on kind of more of a tricky, slow-going enduro type section. Here are the things that I learned on the bike after 3.2 hours. I'll start with the positive. The most positive thing is that the motor has a lot of low-end pull. It's got great low-end power. It's got great mid-range. It's okay on the top. It's on the top end. It's just like most of the 300s that I've used. Most of that power is down kind of in the low RPMs to the mid-range. It's got a big, fat power band down there, which is nice. I adjusted the power valve out to nearly flush on, and Beta suggests that you do that. They're not like KTM. They actually say, hey, adjust the power valve a little bit to your liking and tailor it to your needs. And that's something that the bike did really well. That motor's a monster. And I really loved that part of the bike. But before I even get to taking off, I had a hard time getting the starter motor to engage with the actual motor, like the pinion gear in there or the drive gear or whatever. It was just going zing, zing, which was really weird because I had, started the bike a dozen times at my house while I was setting things up and adjusting the carburetor and doing those burnouts on the driveway and everything. And so this was kind of disconcerting because I hit the thing like 20 times. It was like zing, and then you'd let it completely, let the starter motor completely stop. And every once in a while, this will happen on a KTM or something where you'll hit it and it'll go zing. The starter doesn't engage all the way into the pinion gear or whatever it is on the flywheel. Exactly, I don't know exactly where they hook in, but it was going zing, and so you'd let it completely stop, And then what you're wanting it to do is it starts to go and it engages and it goes onto that pinion or the drive gear and it turns the motor over. It wasn't doing that. I did it like 20 times. And then I put the bike in gear and jerked it back and forth a little bit. And this is a problem because it doesn't have a kickstart. And then finally, it started to engage. And so I was a little bit disconcerted there. And no one else knew that. Everyone else had their bikes already running. And I'm over there trying to get the starter motor to engage. So I'll have to watch that because with no kickstart, that would have ended the day before it even started. It's never done that before, and it didn't do it since, so we'll just have to kind of watch that one closely. About the motor. So the counterbalancing instruments, I'm using air quotes, the counterbalancing instruments that Beta uses are not the same ones that KTM uses. This bike vibrates a lot. I wouldn't bring this up if they hadn't have done a press release saying that the freaking thing was counterbalanced. If they hadn't have done a press release and said it was counterbalanced, I never would have known because the bike is not what I call a counterbalanced motor. It vibrates. It vibrates more than the 200 does, and I know this because I still have the 200 sitting here. I need to take the 200 back to Stedman's in Tooele and turn that bike back in and whatever, but the 300, which supposedly is counterbalanced from Beta 2020, vibrates more than the 200 that isn't counterbalanced. I get it. It's a bigger, 300s vibrate more generally speaking than 250s and 200s and 150s, but it's pretty disappointing. That was one place that I thought Beta was actually going to come and close the gap between them and KTM and Husky. And I was super excited. I did a podcast, I did a video 6-7 months ago when the press release came out, and I'm like, KTM killers? Because I think they're going to be. Well, that was a swing and a miss. That was a whiff. That thing is not, it vibrates. I can't tell any difference between how this one works and how the 2017 works. Now, I didn't get to ride them back to back, but I'm just telling you, it vibrates a lot in your hands. It vibrates a lot in the foot pegs. And yeah, the KTM feels buttery smooth, electric smooth. We had 3 KTMs there and 1 Beta. And one of those was not like the other. And they're all supposed to be counterbalanced. But the KTMs feel electric smooth. There's hardly any vibration. And the Beta, it vibrates just as much as it used to, I swear. So that's a whiff. That's disappointing. Yeah, and like Tyler, the first time that Tyler and Sam got on the bikes, because they'd never ridden the bike at all, and I had them after I rode the bike for several hours, during the day, then I had them get on the bike, and they were like, the first thing that Tyler said was, whoa, this thing vibrates a lot, because he had been riding his 2020 KTM 300X CW TPI, and then he gets on the Beta, and he's like, wow, this thing vibrates a lot. So there you go. The KYB fork. So KYB, it's like the anytime I say anything that could be remotely construed as critical of KYB, people come out with the pitchforks like I am speaking sacrilege and like I am, talking bad about the Holy Trinity. And so I've decided to decided my own nickname for KYB is kind of like the Holy Trinity, because people feel like it's just like this thing that you have to revere and pay all this reverence to. Thing is I've had 5 or 6, I can't remember what it is, 5 or 6 bikes now that have had KYB forks, and I've really only liked one of them, and it was the Yamaha YZ250X. And on that bike, I threw the manual away and said, I'm just going to open my clickers up all the way as far as compression and make that fork as soft as I can do it on the clickers. And then it actually worked pretty well. But I wasn't doing a ton of gnarly stuff on that bike. It was mostly faster flowing desert stuff, open mountain single track where we were just going. And anyway, back to the KYB fork on this one. I was super, hyped up thinking this bike is going to be awesome and it was going to be amazing. And Beta's whole tagline is rideability, so this is going to be good, right? Here's the thing. That fork is valved too stiff for gnarly, slow riding. I can say that definitively because that's basically all we did for 3.2 engine hours is gnarly. There was a couple times where I got into 3rd gear and maybe one time I got into 4th. And the faster I was going, if I was in third gear, the fork was okay. But I ended up having to dial all the compression clicks out, which I had to take my handlebars off. I know a lot of you guys are shaking your heads, but I didn't have a right angle screwdriver. And because I had adjusted my bars directly over the center of those forks, you cannot get a screwdriver, a flat blade screwdriver in there. And even if you do have a right angle, screwdriver, it's very hard to count clicks when you're doing it on a right angle. So I took the handlebars off because I didn't have another option out there on the trail, and adjusted those forks so they were basically, I put them 2 clicks I basically turned them all the way open, and then I put them 2 clicks back in. So technically I have 2 more clicks of travel that I could do. But it was harsh. It was deflecting off things a lot. It felt you were feeling so much of the trail. I mean, it felt like you were just pounding through stuff rather than riding over the top of it. And like I said, the faster you went, the better it felt. But it was by far the stiffest fork that we had there that day. We had a 2017 KTM, and then 2 other 2020 KTMs. One of the 2020s was an XCW KTM, and the other one was an XC KTM. So we had the Explorer fork and we had the Air fork there with us, and it just felt, the KYB fork was not like the others. It was stiff. And I've talked to a few other 2020 beta users in the last week, 2 weeks, and they have expressed the same. It's funny because the whole tagline of beta is rideability, and I loved the other 2 forks that I just got off of with beta. The one was the Sachs 48mm fork on the 2019 300RR. Out of the box, I thought that was the best fork I'd ever been on. I said that, and I stand by it. The Air fork from KTM is really good when I start dropping pressure out of it. I start running less pressure. Excuse me. But if I run the KTM, amount of pressure that they say, 139 PSI, I like the beta fork, that 2019 390 RR fork, better than the KTM fork. It was awesome. It's the ZF fork, I think, or it's on the 2020 Beta 200 RR fork. I also really liked that one. I thought it could do the really slow stuff really great. I didn't do a ton of faster stuff on that Beta, but I was in third gear, fourth gear, sometimes fifth gear a little bit. And the Beta 200 RR was awesome. I loved the fork on that. It did really well. This KYB fork, we are not jiving with that thing yet. It is bouncing off everything. It's deflecting off everything. And yeah, so there's some work. I've got some work to do on that. Overall, the bike felt heavy and slow to turn. Again, you can hear the disappointment in my voice because I was so high on the last 2 betas that I had. I'm like, they've changed a bunch of things. This bike is supposed to be better than the 2017 that I had, and it felt heavy. It felt more like a 450 4-stroke, if I'm totally honest. It was hard for me to get the front wheel where I wanted to go. It felt like I was wrestling a beast. It felt like I was getting worn out. It was so frustrating because I thought for a lot of the day that I was just having an off day, and some days you feel that, right? Some days you're not quite right in the head, and you're kind of having an off day, and that's what I thought was happening. I'm like, man, I just don't have it today, and I'm just not jiving with this bike. And I was blaming it on me because I'm like, surely this bike has to be, the last couple of betas I've had, I absolutely loved a 4-stroke and a 2-stroke. So I thought it had to be me. And I didn't realize how much the bike was wearing me out until I swapped over and rode Tyler's 2020 KTM 300 XCW. I felt like a new man. Suddenly the fork on the KTM was absorbing everything. The front end felt light. The front end felt playful. The rear end stopped just slamming through things and just following with me in like an agreeable manner. And I was like, wow, what a difference. And I rode Tyler's bike for about 20 minutes-ish. And then Tyler was like, hey, Sam, you got to try this beta, because he wasn't enjoying it. And so he didn't want to spend a ton more time riding it. He had been riding a bike that was jiving with him the entire day, and then he moves over to the beta, and he wasn't loving it. So he's like, hey, Sam, you need to try this thing out, which then meant I moved over to Sam's 250, his 2020 250 XC. that bike also felt great, playful, just so playful and so like happy to me is the way to say it. The front fork on the KTM was not as plush as the XCW, certainly not, but it was still light and it was still agile, and I felt like I could place my front wheel anywhere I wanted. Sam only rode the bike, the Beta, for about 20 or 30 minutes, and I could tell he wasn't. I've ridden enough with Tyler and Sam to know when they're not jiving with a bike or when they're not absolutely loving it. And because I'm the guy out there that's on the clock and this is a work day for me, I'm like, hey guys, give me back the bike here. Sam, here's your 250 XE back. Let me ride the bike. And he's like, oh no, it's okay. It's all good. But I know him. I'm like, okay, I'll take it back from you. So I take it back. They weren't really trying to hide the fact that they weren't having a great time on the Beta. And so I take it back, and then I immediately find myself using more energy, mental energy and physical energy, to ride and control the bike. And here's the thing. So there's a lot of different type of terrain that you can get out to in Warner Valley. There's tons and tons, hundreds of miles of trails. A lot of it is like wide open desert and washes where you can be going as fast as you want. The guy that we're going with, Garrett, one of my good friends, he is more of the nasty, gnarly type terrain rider. The nastier, the better. The gnarlier, the better. And I'm cool with that. I like a mix of things. And so Garrett was taking us in some really, really cool terrain. Some stuff I had been on and other stuff that I'd never seen before. And it by the time everything shook out, there was one kind of section. He took us up a canyon and up through a wash and things, and it was by far the gnarliest stuff that I've seen in that area. Really gnarly terrain, super tight stuff where you're lifting your bike through obstacles because they won't fit. The foot pegs won't fit. You know what I mean? Like there was one section where I came up on him and he's like, oh yeah, you just go up over this and you go through these rocks. And he's like, it's not that bad. And so I ended up, going up there, the first one up, and I get up this one nasty section and get into this little boulder field where there's triangular rocks everywhere that are stopping you. And I'm like, Garrett, what are you talking about? This is freaking nasty up here. And you have to, I affectionately nicknamed this one section going through the birth canal, because you have to get your bike up onto this nasty little section where it's off camber and everything. And once you get up over this off camber obstacle wall / thing where you've got sand and all this other slick rock stuff, then you go into this mini boulder field and you have to push your bike through a crevice that is too deep for your if your tires are down in the crevice, which there's no other place for them to go because it's a big V, it's like you're going through a birth canal because the bike will not fit. The foot pegs are hitting. So you have to get up into that spot and then basically lift the bike through. It took me on the back of the bike and Garrett on the front of the bike to lift it through. Tyler was just more of a man than the rest of us, and he pushed his bike through by himself, but you had to be off the back of the bike and grab the rear fender and basically lift it up and push it up through this birth canal is what I'm talking about. Nasty, nasty section. And here's the thing. I was just exhausted. I was getting much more exhausted than I thought I should have been. And I'm in shape, but I'm not in like the best shape ever. But I was exhausted, dude. And the terrain was awesome. The trail was awesome. But I'll tell you what, I was missing that Beta 200RR. I would have much rather, for the riding that we did, I would have been far better off on the Beta 200RR. Heck, I was missing the 390. I would have taken the 390. Now there would have been times when I would have been boiling the bike. Like let's be honest, because I didn't put a fan on any of those three Betas, at least not yet. I may end up putting a fan on this Beta, this 300. If I keep doing the type of stuff that Garrett was taking me through that day, I'm gonna need a fan on it. But I was missing the 390. I would have had more fun on the 200 Beta. 100%. I would have had more fun on the Beta 200 that day. And I think I would have had more fun on the 390 that day, at least in the sections that weren't like the super gnar. It was rough, and towards the end of the day, we didn't do a ton of miles, but we did a lot of hard stuff, and the bike ran out of gas as we were going back towards the truck, but we still had several miles to go up and down single track, and it was really fun single track. And I was the guys call me like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because towards the end of that day, I just kind of hit a wall. And the tipping point for me was when the bike ran out of gas. Everyone else was good to go. I realized, it was probably running a little bit fatter than it should have been. And I was out of gas. I switched it over to reserve, and I'm just like, you know what? The truck is this way. You guys are going this way, which isn't a direct route to the truck. And I just lost it. And I just said, dudes, I'll meet you guys at the truck. And I made a beeline for the road. Because the bike was all of a sudden, then at that point, it was leaking. I was smelling coolant. It was leaking radiator fluid. So it was rough. Like the bike, it was in rough shape, and it was still running fine. But here I was pushing out coolant and everything, even on a trail that wasn't that bad. And what I found out later, I'll get to why it was leaking antifreeze later, but I just took a beeline back for the truck, and I was not a happy camper. The next day, I rode my 2022 F250XC, and the guys were like, who is this rider? Because yesterday on the beta, he was like kind of a monster, and he wasn't any fun to be around. And he was pissed off. And then today, he's just a joyful, happy guy. And they nicknamed me, they said I was bipolar. It ain't easy some of the time, So here are the things that I need to work on now with the bike, because I'm not giving up on it. I'm going to make this thing work. So I got it home, I washed it, and here's the things that I need to do and some of the things I've already done. So let's address the heavy feeling, the heavy, slow, sluggish feeling, because the bike isn't that heavy. It's 244 pounds, which means it's exactly like 3.5 or 4 or 5 pounds heavier than the 250XE that I rode the next day. But I wasn't feeling those 5 pounds. I was feeling something else in the geometry of the bike. So what I did is I raised the forks and the triple clamps. Yesterday, I raised the forks 5 millimeters to compensate for the heavy, sluggish, slow feeling that made me feel like the bike wasn't agile and wasn't nimble. So that should help a bunch. I haven't had to do that on most of the other bikes that I've ever tested. I just test them the way they come from the factory, and I looked at where the forks were in the triple clamps, and they looked very, very similar to how the Beta 200 was set up. And so I just left them. I don't start raising and lowering forks when I get bikes. I just ride them how they come from the factory, because I want to see how the factory has them set up. I set sag and I set clickers, but I don't like raise and lower the forks. So now I've raised them 5 millimeters, which is actually quite a lot, and I think that's going to compensate and help. This heavy, slow, sluggish feeling that should help a bunch. The radiator is the reason why the radiator was leaking is because it got bent pretty badly. I'll probably post some of the pictures up on maybe social media today on Instagram and Facebook, and just kind of show you how the radiators look. I'm like, this is not right. Because now it was bent up enough that the radiator cap was coming in contact with the left fork, and that's a problem. And so what was happening is the reason why I was pushing out coolant is because my left fork was now pushing on the radiator cap and basically loosening it. I've never seen that happen before, but the radiator was bent up, okay? I mean, it got bent in a little bit from a tip over, but it was bent up because some of the rocky, nasty sections we were going through, it was gnar, dude. And so it was bent enough that it started, making, everything was happening, and it was leaking out of the radiator cap. So I'm going to have to get a new left side radiator. Radiator guards would not have prevented this one, because the radiator guards, all the radiator guards that I know, are preventing, from getting smashed in on the side. They're not keeping it from getting smashed upwards, okay? And so this was getting bent upwards, and it just would have been bent upwards. I still would need a new radiator, which is one of the reasons why I've been hesitant to run radiator guards on the last few bikes, is because it doesn't solve everything. And here's an issue where I still would have had to have a new radiator regardless. That means the pipe is shot too. So the pipe doesn't look that bad. It only took a couple of hits, but it was hits in just the right place. So the pipe on the Beta is kind of bent up out of the way. I don't really, they did a pretty nice job on the bend, but it's now bent up in the gooseneck. And this is one of the reasons why I don't run pipe guards, is I can promise you that even if I had a pipe guard on the bike, it still would have pushed up through the radiator and caused all of that damage. The pipe guards really help on the expansion chamber on the right side of the bike. They do well to alleviate some of the dents there, but it's conservation of energy, people. The energy has to go somewhere, and I feel like those dents then, like when the bike tips over on the right side or gets slammed on the right side, that energy is transferred into the pipe, where I feel it's transferred into the gooseneck. the tight bend of the pipe over on the left side down on the bottom, that's where that energy goes, I feel. Open to your interpretation, but that's how I feel. It goes there. So even if I would have had a pipe guard, it still would have pushed up there on the gooseneck, and it would have pushed up on the radiator. I had to pound the pipe off the bike yesterday. So I took the bolts off. There's 2 bolts on it, and then there's two springs, and I had to use like a mallet and beat the pipe off the bike because it was stuck up in the exhaust flange. It was very tight, very bound up in there. So although the pipe doesn't look too bad, the pipe is shot because it doesn't fit anymore. It's not going to allow, when I get the new radiator, it's not going to allow, the proper fitment. So it's toast. I'm going to move the bars forward, or I already did yesterday, move the bars forward one more time to give me room in the cockpit. Now, Beta gives us 6 different positions to put your handlebars, which I think is great because they have 3 holes in the triple clamps, and then your bar mounts are offset, which means you have 6 different positions, I believe. That some quick math there. 6 different positions you can put it in. So now I am now in the second to most forward position. I was essentially just kind of right in the middle, had the bars directly over the center of the forks, which is kind of how I like to use them on a lot of bikes, but every bike's a little different. So on this one now, I'm in, as far as the bolt holes, I'm in the furthest forward bolt hole, but I've turned the mounts around so it's pushing them back. So there's one more position that I could use that would open up the cockpit even more, but I figured I'm baby steps, right? So hopefully that will help me a little bit because I did feel a little bit cramped on the bike. It just felt like the handlebars were a little bit close to me. I'm also going to either install fork clickers or just buy a little tool from Race Tech that allows me to adjust the clickers from under the handlebars. Come on, KYB. There is a better way to do this. We don't need to have a freaking screwdriver in there, and I don't want to use a right angle screwdriver. I want to actually be able to click them with my fingers. There's a better way to do that, KYB. Just put a finger clicker on the suckers, So I'm calling KYB out on that one, not calling Beta out, but hey, Beta could tell KYB to do this. Like, hey, our tagline is rideability, and we want our riders to be able to adjust this stuff. So give us a finger clicker on the top of that fork. Oh yeah, I also broke the chain guide. I need a new chain guide. So in the 3.2 hours, I bent the radiator. I basically I did ruin the radiator on the left-hand radiator. I ruined the pipe and I broke the chain guide. Okay, so a lot of people say like, hey, the chain guides are only a problem on other brands because of the way that they are, the way that everything is designed. And I'm here to tell you that nothing is perfect. And I broke the chain guide on the very first ride out on this Beta. I haven't done that on in fact, I've never done that on another bike on the first ride. But could be just a fluke, so I'm going to get a chain guide for the bike. So I've got a bunch of money, several $100s worth of stuff that I need to get for the bike now before I ride it again. But I am optimistic that raising the forks is going to help with this. I'm optimistic that moving the bars forward, giving me a little bit more room in there is going to help. And if, the thing that I'm just a little bit worried about are those forks, the valving in the forks. And I'm going to get the bike the way I like it. I'm going to get the bike usable for me. And that might mean that I have to give the forks down to my buddy Kevin Egbert and say, hey man, make it so these forks actually absorb some stuff. I don't need these things for 5th gear desert wide open stuff, because I'm not in 5th gear wide open stuff all the time. I need them to work in a wide variety of situations, and I need them when I hit a bump, I hit a rock, I want the fork to actually travel up into the tube so that not all of that energy is transmitted into my hands, arms, shoulders, and torso, okay? So I may actually do that and say, can you soften this baby up? Because the clickers have not done enough for me. But before I do that, I'm going to go ride it again with the forks moved up in the triple clamps and then just see if I'm still fighting it. Then I'm going to go to a suspension guy and try to get that worked on. A little bit of a disappointment right there, but all is not lost because I think that the platform that we have here is good. It has to be good because the other betas that I've had have been good. It's got to be good. So not giving up. Let not your heart be troubled. I'm going to get the bike working. This is now my job. This is now my full-time job. So I didn't like the bike the way it was initially. And I'm going to have to ride the bike some more and do a full review on it. And I'm not going to ride the bike in the way that it was. I don't want to. It wasn't fun. So now it's my job to make some changes to actually make it work for me and make it fun. And hopefully in the process, I'll help some of you guys out there to maybe make yours a little bit more user-friendly and more rideable. So that is my podcast. Those are my first 3.2 engine hours on the Beta 300RR Race Edition. I will say this, the bike looks sick. I should have said this, but I think it goes without saying. It's one of the best looking bikes out there, if not the best looking enduro bike out there. That 300RR, the Race Edition, the way they've got it with the red and the blue and everything, really good looking bike. Really good looking bike. So we just need to get the thing to act for me the way it looks for me. And if I can get that to happen, then I think we'll be in a good place. So thank you guys for listening, and it's awesome that you guys are hearing this probably today, the same day that I'm recording this, which is on January 15th, because this information is not going to get out to YouTube till I don't know exactly when. So that's one of the benefits of listening to the podcast here, is you guys get to see and hear what's going on a little bit sooner than the YouTube people. So anyway, thanks so much for listening, and let's cross our fingers. I'm going to get that sucker working. I am. We're going to do it. It's like Yoda. My kids are watching Star Wars, and it's like, oh, I'll try to make it better. No. I'm going to be like Yoda when he's talking to Luke Skywalker, and I'm like, there is no try. Do, right? And so I'm not going to try to make that bike better. I actually am going to make it better. We're going to make that sucker sing, and we're going to make her play nice with me. Okay. Thanks, guys. Wherever you go, let's leave a single track.